We've got some
Hey, I'm Luis.
And I'm Luis.
And you're listening to the Content is Profit podcast.
We spent the last 4 years learning the strategies and techniques from some of the top marketers in the world on how to create content that turns into profit. And today, we're bringing them to you so you can take action immediately and start creating real content momentum.
If you'd like to learn more about how to turn your content into profit, go to contentisprofit.com. Oh, yeah. Why are we going live so early? Well, because today's guest is across the world. Today, we have an eminence of podcasting in the house. Not only that, he's also Canadian, which proves that our hypothesis is correct. Successful people come either from Utah or Canada.
That is right. You just stated the truth, my friend. But today's guest, epicness, doesn't stop there. Check this out. He has visited over 45 countries, biked 3,500 kilometers across Europe. That's a lot of miles for my American friends. And walked 300 kilometers from Portugal to Spain on the Camino of Santiago.
What about the podcasting side of things? Today's guest is the owner of Counterweight Creative. He created the Podcast Marketing Academy, where he teaches podcast strategy, marketing, and production. And check this out. He wrote over 250 blog posts in 2020.
That's right.
How insane is that?
That is epic.
So
Can you even imagine writing 250 blog posts in 1 year? It's like, I feel like at the end of the year, my fingers would be like this. Like, I'll be like cramp, all my fingers. But, you know, with that being said, please welcome master podcaster, founder of Counterweight Creative, and citizen of the world, Jeremy Enns.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me on today.
Absolutely.
Jeremy,
man.
welcome. As you can tell, we are pretty pumped up that you're here with us today.
I'm pumped up to be here with you guys as well. You guys are bringing the energy. This is good.
It's early in the morning, you know, so we gotta it's late in the afternoon for you, early in the morning for us. So we're like, we gotta get the day started, you know, with all the energy.
Jeremy, tell us a little bit. Where are you now?
So I and my girlfriend, we just got to Belgrade, Serbia. We spent the last 3 months in Croatia. We were in Split, Croatia there, and we were in Lisbon for 3 months before that, and then in the UK for 6 months before that, when the lockdown started. And so we've kind of been just jumping from place to place wherever we've been able to kind of get into. Travel has been pretty restricted, obviously, over the past year, and you know, we're not out there like sightseeing it too much. It's just kind of wherever we can go. She's American, I'm Canadian, so if we were to head back to North America, we would have to be separated, as Americans aren't allowed into Canada, and I would only be allowed in the US for a few months at a time. So we're just trying to like stay together wherever we can. And so Serbia was one of the very few places in Europe. There was maybe like 2 or 3 options that we had after our visas ended in Croatia. And so we're here now, and it's been snowing the past few days. Wow. And I think it's supposed to warm up now in the next few, but it's been a little bit colder than it was in Croatia. But we're happy to be here.
Oh, man. In the name of love.
In the name of love, yeah.
You guys, I mean, this is such a cool thing, right? Because
it's an incredible love story.
Incredible
let me tell you.
love story. And we need to talk about this. Just saying, Jeremy. Yeah. So, I mean, for those who don't know you, do you want to share a little bit of your backstory? Like how this started? Obviously, the amazing feats that you've done, the physical challenge of the things that you've done, the company, the academy. Like, how did everything start? Like, how was your beginning?
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. I don't normally start my story with the travel stuff so much, but as we've been talking about it now, it actually does all tie back to that. And you mentioned in the intro there, I'd done the cycle tour across Europe with a friend of mine. Before I ever got into online business, I didn't know online business existed or any of that. But since I was, maybe 10 years old, around that time, I'd always wanted to travel and had this real, thirst for exploration. And so that had always been something that I wanted to do, but was never quite sure how that was going to work out. And so when this friend and I, he came to me, we had been talking about traveling for a number of years. He was a high school friend, and a few years after graduating, he sent me an email one morning, and it was just like, hey, so all these countries that we've had on our list that we always wanted to go to. Don't laugh, but I think I thought of the perfect way to see them all. Cycle tour. And immediately I was like, oh yeah, that's perfect, because we were both big cyclists and just as commuters and just for fun. But when he proposed this, I was like, okay, we got to do this. So we spent, I think, about a year saving up, and then took a year off, just quit our jobs. We didn't have, any kind of real jobs at that point, and
Yeah.
did the cycle tour for 3 months. And then I did a backpacking trip in Southeast Asia with my girlfriend at the time for another 4 or 5 months, something like that. So spent 9 months traveling, and definitely, like, I had always wanted to travel at that point already, but I got the bug even more. And so when I came back, I started getting curious about, what the options were. And I stumbled onto both the worlds of podcasting and online business at pretty much the same time. When I'd heard about podcasts for a while, I was trained as a sound engineer, so obviously had that audio editing and mixing and mastering and all that kind of technical ability. Podcasting is pretty easy if you have that background and you're used to working in a big studio.
Yeah.
And so I started listening to podcasts. I was working a job where I could listen to 8 hours of podcasts a day. So I was listening
Wow.
at 1.5, 2 times speed, pretty much for a year, learning everything I could about online business. And by the end of that year, I had a handful of clients, podcast editing clients, and quit that day job. I kind of scaled it back a little bit over time, went part-time, then quit, and went on a trip to Europe, and spent the first kind of a year-long trip through Europe, developing the podcast editing agency. At that point, it was just me, and then that's been
Yeah.
5 years now, and we've grown the team, and have grown in level of client. I remember at the start was editing shows for $30 an episode, and that
Wow.
doesn't. It's hard to scale a team when you're you're only editing for $30 an episode. So we
Yeah.
kind of moved on to helping much bigger clients and more ambitious clients with a lot more of the strategy aspect as well, and marketing and
Oh
things like
man.
that, in addition to the editing.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes.
You got the crowd roaring right here, Jeremy.
Yeah.
I know they're going crazy. Okay, guys, come on. We silence a
Yeah.
little bit. We gotta continue the interview. Jeremy, I just want to highlight. Obviously, everything is super awesome. Like, we could potentially do like a full series of this interview, just diving into your individual experiences. But I want to highlight something that comes to our conversations quite a bit, which is the pricing part of things. Right? Like you mentioned, hey, you started with $30. For us, when we first started, too quickly we realized that the service that we were offering 4 years ago was not scalable at the price that we were selling it, right? So we had to kind of learn and evolve, right? Go to different type of clients sometimes, right? So before Fonzie asks the smart questions, right? Because he's really good at this. How was that realization moment, and what are some steps you took maybe to show some people, right? Because the people that are listening to us are either starting their own businesses, right? They might be working in sales, towards that frictionless sale. Like, what are some of the steps you took to be able to make that leap, right? Believe in yourself that you guys obviously could do it. How was that process for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the light bulb moment was reading Profit First. I don't know if you guys have read that book. I know it's a popular one in the business and online business world.
Yeah, no, not yet. But fun fact: Amazon just delivered it 2 days ago. So we'll be diving in. You're not the first person this week that says it. So the universe is telling us go there.
Yeah, and I think that up to that point, I had been basing all of my pricing off of nothing, basically. And so, when new clients were coming in, I would, raise the prices every client or two. And luckily for us, we have what is essentially a subscription model, where clients are with us for the long term, and it's monthly packages that we're selling. So there's not a lot of turnover. And so that kind of gives, with that type of business model, you have some flexibility to just continually raise prices. It's because you still have the old people, you can kind of grandfather them up. And so I was raising things a little bit every so often when we got new clients, but we weren't getting like new clients in the door every week or anything like that. So it was pretty slow. And I was looking like, what everyone does, where you go look at all the other production agencies out there and see what other people are charging and kind of say, well, okay, like, how do I fit into this? Are we offering the same thing? Are we offering more? Are we offering less? And what types of clients are they working with? And so, that's never a good strategy. But of course, when you're starting out, it's hard to know what else to do, because we all want to charge 10 times what we're worth, but it's often limiting beliefs that we have ourselves that are keeping us from that, and it's hard to overcome those without any kind of other outside validation of seeing that, oh, other people are successfully doing this, or the clients are willing to pay this, or whatever. And so when I read Profit First, there was part of the book he talks about basically what your margins should be based on your level of business. And he's got a whole formula that you go and plug in your numbers and see what they're at. And based on that, then you make these allocations to these different bank accounts, and it can get a little bit technical, so we won't go into that. But basically, I looked up like, okay, my profit margin should be this, and I looked at it, and it was like just so it was laughable how far off it was. And he says in the book, he's like, probably most people like this is going to be way out of whack when you're reading this, when you're going to put this into effect. And I really like he talks about that in the book. He does a great job of not making you feel bad for like messing all this stuff up, because nobody teaches you this. And we, we're all just making it up on the fly and charging when, especially if we start from like a side hustle or something like that, we're taking whatever we can get. And so that was kind of the moment where I was like, oh, this is what my profit margin should be. Okay. And from there, then I built a Google sheet that had basically programmed in, okay, if editing costs, if I'm paying my editor this much, my show notes writer this much, my admin person this much, all these plugging in all these things, and then for these different packages, then this is what 50%, the 50% profit margin should be. And then I know, okay, well, I can just plug in what everybody's rates are, how much I'm charging per episode, how many episodes, whatever. And then this is the amount I should charge per month. And so based on that, then I was like, okay, actually now I feel solid. It was so much easier to quote people because I knew, okay, this is the work we're doing and this is what I should charge. And because of that, I think it was like easy to, it made it so much easier to write up proposals, but it also gave me a lot of confidence in knowing like I have to charge this much. Like if I don't charge this much, the business is going to go under. Like I can't afford to keep running it. And so it wasn't even about like, I think sometimes when you are thinking about, especially when you're starting out, like doubling your rates or something like that, it feels almost greedy sometimes. Like, well, I don't need that much, or like, how could I mark it up by, 100% over what the costs are? Like that's so much. Nobody's going to pay that. They can get it way cheaper. But when you start looking at this over the long term of like all this other overhead that goes into it, and I mean paying yourself a salary, then you kind of realize like, oh yeah, I won't be viable in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, whatever it is, if I am not actually building this profit margin into it. And that's especially true like when you think about it, what I recently had another realization just in the past few months that I wasn't building in enough profit margin to expand the team, to add on roles that aren't actually part of the client deliverables. So like a operations person and a marketing person for myself, not for our clients, and all these things. Like there's no, if you don't have additional profit margin, like you need to build those in before you actually want to hire those people so that you have that budget when you do. And so that was kind of, I realized that and have now built that into my spreadsheet again or my calculator, so that is all accounted for as well. But I mean, each time you add those new things in, it's just like, oh man, this is getting expensive. But you also kind of understand why a lot of services cost so much, is just because there's a lot that goes into them.
Yeah. Oh, so good. We're going to celebrate this. Obviously, crowd going wild here in the studio.
This is what we call, Jeremy, golden boulder, right? It's like a golden nugget, just way, way bigger. This is amazing. Like this segment right here, we're definitely going to chop it up and share it with the world, because hopefully a lot of people will watch this and tell themselves, am I charging enough, right? And you're doing a favor, because when you don't charge enough, right, you might even resent the client that you're working with, because now you're like, oh, I'm not getting paid enough to do all this work. Instead, when you have your margins that you haven't figured out, like you hear me, right? Then you can go and say, I can fully support and service this client right here with all of my ability and attention that they deserve, right? So it is such an important point that people need to accept. And it is difficult to come by through, to that confidence, build up that confidence of when you quote someone telling them, hey, it's not, the price used to be this, but now we're going to charge you, maybe 50% more, or who knows, way more than it was before. And it is ultimately because of them. You are building your business to serve clients in a better way. So thank you so much for sharing that. And
no problem.
And Jeremy, like I keep thinking, going back to the beginning of your story too, and say you're looking for like about 8 hours a day for like a year, right? And I feel a lot of people in this game, especially in the online business, online marketing world, they get caught up in the consumption aspect. After a year, you started your business, then you start to, slowly grow it. But what led you to go from consumption to action? Was there a challenge in there for you mentally, right? Your mindset, how did your mindset change? And how did you go about acquiring those first few clients for yourself?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I was always experimenting. I actually, when I first started listening to podcasts and getting into the world of online business, I was pursuing a photography business. I'm still into photography. I don't have as much time for it anymore, but that used to be a really big part of my life, and especially related to traveling. And so I was looking to build a photography blog and wanted to do courses and all that kind of stuff under that. So I was writing maybe 2 articles a week or something like that on this blog, and it was kind of getting a bit of traction. But I knew that it was going to be a long haul to actually build up an audience big enough to then create courses and sell them, and that was going to be
Yeah.
1 or 2 years maybe to bring that into fruition. And somewhere along the line there, I realized that starting a service-based business was such a faster way to being able to actually go start traveling. Like I realized, like, okay, I could keep pursuing this thing, this photography goal. Like that's the thing I'm maybe most passionate about, most interested in. But then I realized, like, my actual goal is to be able to travel, to work and travel. And there's a much faster route to getting there rather than, staying at home for the next 2 years, building this audience. I could, within 6 months, have enough clients to start traveling if I took my existing skills that I, went to school for, the audio engineering, and applied that. So from the moment that I was like listening to podcasts and things like that, I was always experimenting with that photography blog at first,
Yeah.
and then applying it. It's one of the things that I found is it's hard to waste any of that knowledge. Like there were so many things that as I was building, then 6 months later, I worked on the photography business for 6 months or so, or maybe 9 months overlapping with the podcast stuff, and like building websites and things like that. Once I switched to podcasting, I was like, oh, I know how to build a website because I did it for the photography blog, and I know how to do
Yeah.
all these other kind of technical things, and maybe even some basic marketing things because I'd done those somewhere else. So you kind of build up those building blocks through just applying it to all these different things, even if they're not the final business that you're running. And
Yeah.
in relation to the like content consumption and overwhelm, I noticed a point where like that's a lot of podcasts I was listening to, and there was definitely a point where everything started to sound redundant. I was like, okay, I've heard this before. Yep. Okay, this is all starting to sound the same. And so at that point, I kind of realized a couple things. And so the first was that this is probably true. If this many different people are saying it who are all quite successful, they have big podcasts, big businesses, like this is probably true. And so that's good. I know I'm on the right track, and
Yeah.
probably like I actually need to get to applying that stuff. And the other thing was that I started to get kind of, I don't know if I'll say burnt out, but just like tired of that content, the online business stuff. So I would pared it back to like maybe 1 or 2 shows that I really loved that I kept listening to in the business space. But then I started actually listening to a lot of other content that was just like storytelling stuff, like This American Life, and things that were just generally interesting to me. Freakonomics, 99% Invisible. What were some of the Hardcore History were some of the shows I listened to. And so I would like listen to this other stuff that wasn't business related and just let all that stuff kind of like, ruminate in my mind. Along with the business stuff. And so I think that's happened multiple times. Earlier last year, I went on a huge binge of this one agency show. I think it's called Smart Agency Masterclass with Jason Swank. And I just binged through tons, like dozens of those episodes. I think they're like 30-minute episodes, and I'd listened to probably like 3 or 4 a day. And
Wow.
I'd never listened to like an agency specific show before, and I never even thought to look. And so I learned a lot from that. They were much different, or a lot of them were very different types of agencies than I'm running with. Some like dozens or hundreds of employees, and like where the goal is like to build up and sell the agency into a massive like national marketing agency or something like that. So that's not my goals, but I did learn a lot about running an agency from them. And after I listened through however many 50 episodes or more, I was like, okay, I'm done with this, and just like let that go and moved on to something else. So I've kind of you reach a point, and I've come to like recognize that where it's not helpful to keep consuming anymore, and you just need to like turn it off and like focus on implementation. And so often now with my education, it's very much like focused of like, I want to learn a specific thing, and I'll go really deep on that, and then I'm going to only listen to other stuff in the off time that's just like it's not business related. Although probably for people like us, everything that you consume always comes back to business. It always gets funneled back in, which is I think one of the great reasons to listen to broad content that isn't business related, because you come up with these like new ideas and new perspectives, new ways of looking at the things that are happening in your business that you're not going to get from listening to, you know, yet another business podcast that's like, do these 5 things to like increase your traffic or whatever.
Yeah. That is, you know, we had a previous conversation on Monday with George Brandt. I don't know if you're familiar with him, and we kind of landed a little bit in a similar topic. And, you know, we started thinking about principles, right?
Yeah.
Under any topic, there's a certain amount of principles, right? That if you master and you know, you can actually go ahead and then master that topic, right? Or at least be the 1% of the people to master that topic. Yeah. And what you're telling me is that, right? Like you got to a point where everything that you were listening to was redundant. And it's because you already heard those principles so many times that they were ingrained in your brain that you're like, I already know this, right? And now all you got to do is take action. And a lot of people say knowledge is power. And in reality is action on that knowledge is power. Just knowledge by itself, it won't do anything for you, right? We need to take action on that. So it's so important. Thank you for bringing that up. And I love the fact that you actually talk about going and listening to other things and reframe it back to business. We have that issue every single time we read something or we watch a movie. We're like, oh, look at that. That connects to like something that you would have no idea that we could connect to the business. We're like, look at that. We got a business lesson from watching, you know, a movie, The Mandalorian, right? And you're like, hey, how do you even do that? Yeah. And that is the basis of creating ideas. One of our favorite books is A Technique for Producing Ideas. It's like a 20-page book. It's super short by a copywriter. And he talks about the importance of consuming other things that are not just business related in your vertical. Like go and, you know, study the things that cause you curiosity, right? Like history, right? You just said about you listen to hardcore history. So when you listen to all these things, then when you write and you talk and when you speak all these things, you can match all these ideas together, creating your own new ideas, which is absolutely amazing. And that's what is going to differentiate you and any other marketer from the rest.
Yeah. I remember going to an event and they were saying, hey, you guys should go to a totally different conference, right? Like something that is like, you know, plant-based or nature-based, and just go sit and listen and consume that different. And, you know, right now we have the advantage of the technology or podcast for those listening to podcasts, right? Like for me, same thing. Like I listen to a lot of Wondery shows, right? The way that, and we take some tips of like how they produce the show. I think Planet Money is one of my favorite ones. And the, episode 1000, I think what they did was they broke down how they do their episode, like their faces and their framework. And I was like, wow, this is a masterclass on its own. It's like they're just living, like putting it out there. Somebody else can grab that framework and apply it to yourself. And not only that, but on different topics, different kind of conversation. And I think that's such an important thing. And I want to highlight something too that you mentioned for people like, we as listeners, we go in and we kind of grab content from others. But on the point of view of the content creator, that most people are like, I just need more listening, more listeners, more people in my show, more stuff, but like more downloads, blah, 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 right? For us, our mission is to hopefully provide the tools and the inspiration and for them to take action. So I'm going to be okay when having this amazing conversation with you, Jeremy, that somebody's going to take that and they're going to go out and execute. And then they might not listen to 10 of my episodes, but then they might come back and they grab another piece of information. So that is more rewarding to me. So detaching myself from that metric or the people might be coming in, it comes organically. And you know, if you're truly having fun and adding value, more people are going to come in. But I'm truly okay with people coming in, taking this lesson that you just like drop this golden ball and go execute. And then they might come back 3 months down the road or 2 months down the road. And that's okay. Yeah. So I just wanted for people that are listening and they're content creators, know that that's okay. That's why we create the content, to go help people so they can go execute.
Yeah. Jeremy, I'm extremely curious. When in your journey was it that you realized podcasting could be an incredible tool to grow your business, right? And to grow other people's business?
Yeah. So I think that was my entry point to the world of online business. So I was always aware of that. And all the people, all my early role models were all podcasters. And, you know, they might have also had blogs, or maybe at that point, not a lot of them had YouTube channels at that point. But definitely like podcasting was their main content creation channel. So I think that was my introduction to online business. So that was always kind of like, okay, this is a great way to grow your business. And I think
Yeah.
it wasn't, I think it's more been in the past couple of years that I've actually had a kind of shifting perspective. And I think that things have changed in the world of podcasting here, where 5 years ago, you could start a show and there probably wasn't that much competition. So if you had a great sounding show and your content was okay, you're probably going to grow a pretty big audience. Whereas today, you can have a great sounding show and great content and you can still remain entirely obscure. And so kind of what I realized is that like a lot of our clients were signing up to work with us, starting shows, paying us quite a bit of money, and they weren't getting that great results. And some of them really were, and some of them weren't. And so I started getting curious about like, well, okay, both like let's take client A and client B. One's growing, one's not. They both have great shows. They both have great content, great big name guests. Like, what's the difference here? And what I realized is that today in like 2021, podcasting, I think, plays a much different role in a marketing system than it did 5 years ago. And so today, I think that podcasting, actually, I'll start with where most people are still kind of coming at podcasting from an outdated perspective, where they're starting a podcast, and this applies to any kind of content creation, as a tool for audience growth and exposure. And it like definitely can do that. But of course, as anybody who has a podcast is likely aware, specifically podcasting, discoverability is still a major kind of hurdle or problem for podcasters. That there's been no great solution yet for just getting organic listeners, whether that's through SEO. Like there are, you can structure your podcast episodes and show in a way to encourage getting found, but none of the platforms are really that great at that yet. And I think that's going to be changing, but at this point, it's not. And so people start podcasts as a way to grow their audience, but what they don't realize is that you actually have to like market your marketing, which is the podcast, and that no show is really going to grow that much. And there are exceptions. Most shows, though, I should say, are not going to grow without you actually doing outside marketing, pulling people to the show. And so that's kind of like disheartening when you think about it. You're like, well, okay, then why am I even starting the podcast if I have to market that to get people into the podcast, which is to get people into my business? So why don't I just do whatever the other thing is to get people into my business? But the point of the podcast is actually, and this is where podcasting is just the best platform out of any out there, is for building trust with people. And of course, as we all know, the whole know, like, and trust factor. People aren't going to buy from you if they don't have that trust with you. And I can't think of a better platform out there than podcasting for building trust, where people are, binging through episodes, potentially spending, 30 to 60 minutes with you in their ears. I listen, any of my favorite shows, like I have listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of them. I've not come close to that on any YouTube channel. There might be a few blogs that I've read almost back to front, but not that many. And so podcasting is just such a versatile way to be able to, take our favorite people around with us and listen to their thoughts and really get inside their mind. I think that, good YouTube is fairly highly edited, and even you have to be a really great writer to get a lot of the nuance and emotion across in your writing. Whereas podcasting, it's not highly edited in the same way that YouTube might be. It doesn't feel as much of a performance sometimes. I think it's much more intimate, and people are used to, just listening to more at length conversations that are just free flowing. And, we know that a lot of times as podcast producers, they are quite highly edited, but they still feel more natural, and they're not quite as like snappy and to the point as YouTube content might be to keep people engaged. And so I think like with that over time, like podcast listeners, like anybody who's listening to this, think of your favorite shows. Like you feel like the host, and when they come out with a new product or offer, if it's a good fit for you, it's like the decision's already been made. Like you're going to buy it. And so I think that's where podcasting like really shines. And I think that's a bit of a reframe that people need to think like, okay, the podcast is not the thing that's going to grow my audience.
Do we lose you, Jeremy?
That was to the golden border.
I can still hear you guys here.
But
there we go. We got you back, Jeremy.
We got you back.
Yeah.
So, you
I was just
broke the internet with that.
Yeah. I just to finish that off. I think it's just a reframe there that people need to say like, okay, well, the podcast plays one role, which is the trust building tool. And then we need something else, which is the exposure tool in order to get people into the podcast. And just exposure alone is not going to turn into sales. It needs that exposure, then the trust, and then you're going to convert people into clients and customers.
Amazing. All right, so we already discarded that, the outdated perspective of podcasting is just like going there for discoverability and exposure. Like you cannot just create a podcast, put it out into the world, and say people come to me, right? I mean that saying of we'll build it and they'll come, that doesn't exist in this marketing world. Now we got to market or marketing, right? How do we go about doing that, or at least what are like some of your 1, 2, or maybe top 3, tips for somebody that is, maybe they have 5, 10 episodes out already, and they're like, okay, how do I market now my marketing? Because I am not getting traction. I'm not getting, to connect with the people that I want to. How do I go about doing that?
Yeah. So I think the first thing here is you talked about at the start how the title to create a podcast that grows itself, which is kind of converse to what I was just talking about here. And so I think that we still do want to address like good shows do grow by word of mouth, and good anything grows by word of mouth. That's almost the only way that anything ever really grows. It's really hard to market yourself to success on just marketing alone. And so I think where most people, if you're not getting traction, it's probably because you're not aiming narrow enough. And of course, if this is something I've struggled with, this is something that everybody struggles with content marketing, with your business, with like anything where you're trying to reach an audience, we don't narrow ourselves down enough with our niche. And so how I like to usually think about it is thinking about like which group of people, and this could be, demographics, psychographics, hopefully a mix of both of those, but which group of people can you realistically become the very best in the world for? And so start like narrowing that down and think like at some point you can add in so many filters and variables that you might actually already be that best option in the world. And so at that point, maybe you actually want to widen it out a little bit so it's a little bit more aspirational. You have to do some work to get there, but you have a chance at actually becoming that top person for that very, very specific group of people. And once you're able to do that, like that's when word spreads, when you can be known for one singular thing that you do better than anyone else. And I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about this, when you think about being the best in the world at anything, that feels like, well, you need to like give up everything else in your life and just dedicate yourself to that. And I don't think that that's necessarily the approach you need to take. It's more on the narrowing your line of sight of who you're actually looking to appeal to. And so once you do that, that's when people start to market the show for you. And when you can be that like just absolute best, if somebody says like, okay, well, what is the best show out there on, let's say we work with a lot of wellness people. So let's say paleo diet for women in their 50s or something like that. Like that's a pretty narrow niche there. And if you could be the go-to person for that, I think that's achievable for almost anyone who already has a background in paleo diet or something in fitness. They could probably, dominate that small niche. And once you do that, then it starts to spread outwards, because I think the place where people get it wrong is they think, well, if I say that this is my niche, those are the only people who are going to listen to me. But really, it's about those are the people you're marketing to. And actually, a whole bunch of other people are still going to be interested, even though they're not quite your core target audience. There's going to be, maybe 70% overlap, and it still might be the best content for them because they like your personality or whatever that is. And so it's not excluding people. You're still going to get a lot of those people. It's just you're marketing specifically to one group of people. So I think that's the first thing to address when it comes to like growing a show. In terms of like actually getting that exposure, my favorite way is to do podcast guesting on other shows. And this is something like you can be so targeted with who you get in front of by the shows that you reach out to, because you can look at the show and you can say, okay, well, clearly this show is appealing to, let's take your show, for example. It's appealing to people who are, into content marketing, entrepreneurship, online business. And so if I'm looking to get in front of those people, I can look at your show and be like, okay, well, that's my audience right there. And of course you can get even narrower depending on the vibe, even within like those shows. Like maybe there's some shows that have a super like aggressive vibe versus like a heart-centered vibe or something like that. So you can look at the shows, you can listen to one episode and you can be like, oh, this appeals to the people I'm looking to get in front of. And so you can go out and pitch those people. And if you are an expert in any kind of subject matter that overlaps with that audience, that would be beneficial to that audience, then, chances are you have a good shot at being featured as a guest there. And, it's not about getting on shows with millions of followers, but even, 500 people who weren't aware of you before, but who are perfect fit for what you do. Like that's a really significant kind of addition to your audience potentially.
Yeah. And that also the people that listen to those podcasts already trust that person. And by them having you on their platform, that, you know, kind of like signifies to the other people like, hey, we trust this person as well. And it gives you like this level of not authority, right? But like trustworthiness, if you want to put it that way. And now their audience, you're leveraging that trust, which is huge, right? And also something that comes to mind when you were talking about niching down into your market is one word equity, right? And it's kind of like, okay, what is that one word that as soon as people say it, they know is you? Or in this sense, we can do one sentence equity, for example, like you said, right? Paleo market for moms over 50 years old is very niche, right? So when I say this, who is the person I'm thinking about, right? And the easiest example of all is search, right? When we say search, we all think about Google, right? Of course. And when people say content is profit, people think about BIZBROS. Okay. Hopefully that's the one sentence equity we're going for, right?
Come on, guys, go spread the word.
And when they go for podcast producing, they're thinking about Jeremy right here, right? So those are the things that we want to work in with our podcast and our messaging. So I love that. Thank you for bringing that on. And the guesting side of things is just so interesting and important that I think is so overlooked as well.
I mean, I'm pretty sure we're doing this episode like a podcasting masterclass because you're just giving everything, right? Like, and it's not secret formula. It's like consistency plus the things that you just mentioned. And also, I've studied. We want to add to, you know, the benefits of publishing, right? As whatever podcast or whatever medium, right? We're talking about podcasting today, but for us, it changed everything, right? Like the second we dove into our show, that's when everything changed. We were able to grow, we were able to scale, we were able to find those amazing people. Now we call it clients and partners, right? Now, also, there's change that happens inside of us, right? We were chatting yesterday with Shelly and also Monday with George about this effect that publishing does inside of you. Like you communicate better. You now have the confidence to have amazing conversations. You might have really cool relationships that before you were not able to access, right?
I mean, I'm just gonna throw this out there. Like we would have never thought about, you know, meeting Jeremy that was in Croatia if it wasn't for podcasting.
Absolutely, right? And yeah, now you have two Venezuelan brothers. I'm sorry about that, but you know, it's what happened. But and then after that is whatever comes after that is just a winning, right? Like whatever comes after the marketing, the market, you know, your marketing, right? Just a plus for that internal change that starts to happen with you and the relationships that you're able to build. And I'm sure you've lived that on your end, right? So I've had this question since because I think like internally we know we might have an answer for this question, but for you, when people ask you, right, have these conversations on, well, what's going to be return on investment when we start a show, for example, right? For us, that's a question that comes often when we present the opportunity to do the M2M or the content momentum program, right? They're like, oh man, like all this content, all this stuff, the show XYZ, right? There's input that we need from them, right? That's an investment in time. We're helping them with all the after. But what do you say to those people? Or do you even have those conversations because you have your audience so dialed down that they don't even ask that question? What's the scenario there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the people who come to us, they are already sold on podcasting itself. And so I think, you know, there have been people who, you know, I do have sales calls with every so often who are just exploring, they're on the fence. And those, you know, if rarely they turn into clients, sometime down the line, it might take 6 months or a year. But I'm, you know, really upfront with people, kind of like we've been talking about here, that, you know, podcasting is probably not going to be a quick win. It's not going to grow your audience overnight. It's probably going to take a year. One of the things that I like to say is this, I always say it regarding podcasting, but this applies to any kind of content marketing. But you can do it for a year and it probably won't feel like it's worth it. It might feel like maybe you've kind of broken even on the time you've put in. Probably not even that. But if you do it for 5 years, it could entirely change your life. And so it's what you're talking about there with the consistency, and it's all built on compounding returns. Where, you know, as we've all become very familiar with exponential growth curves this past year with COVID, you do it for a long time and it looks like nothing, and then all of a sudden it just starts rapidly going up. And that's that power of compounding returns of like, you can do it for that first year, and even the second year it feels like a big struggle, and then all of a sudden for no reason at all, you don't change anything, and all of a sudden it just starts compounding and building up, and you get all this momentum going, and pretty soon you become unstoppable. And so I tell people that, and I say, like, this is something, it's podcasting is a long game, and it's not about quick audience growth. There, you should probably go look at Facebook ads if you want that, but this is about building trust. And like, think about investing 5 years in building trust with people who are then going to be with you for the next 20 or 30 or 40 or whatever it is. Like, that's a pretty powerful thing there that is well worth the investment, in my opinion.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah. And I love the honesty up front, right? It's like, hey, it's a long-term game, and you need the commitment, right? If you're gonna go into this, you need to understand. It's not like you're gonna see results. You could, if something happens, who knows? But the normal is that long term. So being honest again with your clients, and I think that goes back to the pricing part of things, right? Because when we are, giving a proposal to somebody and they're like, why is it so much more than these other companies? I say, well, because, I'm building this company and I want to serve you in the best possible way. Again, being honest. And it ties to what you just said.
Oh, man. Dude, Jeremy, today has been an incredible masterclass. I mean, at some point, I'm going to throw it out there. We need to bring you again part 2 and continue to dive deep, because it has been incredible. Not just for us, but for the people listening, obviously. So we're going to really listen to this, and just, I think we sync very well in how we think, because, the content game is also long-term, right? Like, for us, podcast has been the main pillar, and then from there, everything else that we do afterwards is just enhances that experience, and the quality of people that we've been able to communicate with and build the relationships and eventually, work with, has been incredible. And I'm sure you see it on your end as well. So with that, we have a couple questions here for you to wrap up the show.
I'll take the action point.
You take action point. Yeah. Okay, sweet.
So, Jeremy, we usually ask, right, what is one action point that we can leave the audience with to take their business or their podcast in this conversation to the next level? And I would love, we talked about guesting, right? Is one of the best ways now to get those other eyeballs from other communities, other podcasts. What would be an action point that could lead somebody to be a guest in one new podcast?
Yeah. So, I mean, I actually have a free mini course on this. If people are interested, it's at counterweightcreative.co/podcast guesting. And so there are more than one action point. You can get all the information on how to get booked on shows there. But I would say that the first step, and this ties back into something else that we talked to before, is just getting super, super clear on who that audience is, who that person is that you can be the best option in the world for. And I think that kind of just to reframe it another way, like, if you can't be the best person in the world for just one person, you're probably not going to grow an audience. You just need to start with that one person who you're like, I can serve this person better than anyone else in the world. I know for a fact that I can do that. And if you can do that, they're going to tell one other person like them, and that's how things grow. And you're going to need that for guesting on other shows. You need to know who you are actually wanting to get in front of. You need that for building your own audience, for creating content for them, for building your products and services. All these different things stem from like who that person is that you are better equipped than anyone else to serve. And so I think that if there's one action item, it's like getting super clear on that person or that narrow group of people who you can be that best in the world for.
I love it.
Sounds good. Well, I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure we have listeners here, like, I want to meet Jeremy. I want to like work with him 100%. Who's your person?
Yeah, so I'm actually currently going through a brand strategy process, which is kind of redefining this. So we, for the past, I mentioned before that we worked with a lot of health and wellness entrepreneurs. And so for the past few years, we've been kind of 70% in the wellness space, and that was all just through referrals. And so we kind of had niched down to being, the only really podcast production agency who was targeting specifically health and wellness businesses. That's kind of shifting now, as I'm thinking like, well, who do I want to be working with over the next, 10 years or 20 years? And what's really in line with the content that I just naturally create, because that was something that I just kind of fell into. And so it's not quite fully defined yet, but it's becoming more people in like the business for good space, people who believe in using their platforms and the businesses that they've created to actually influence social change, not like through their products themselves, but in addition to that. And I've been meeting so many business owners who like they offer one product or service, but they also have this larger view of how responsible businesses contribute to the world around them and their communities and the people, their teams, and really everyone on the world. So that's really where I want to work with people who are of that mindset and who are kind of like breaking away from some of the old school, maybe like sleazier online marketing tactics, and are looking to really infuse their work and their marketing with generosity and empathy and really like just care that comes through and that kind of honesty. So that's who I want to work with. If you know anyone, send them my way.
Absolutely. And if you're listening, please go ahead, scroll down. The links are going to be right there. Communicate with Jeremy, obviously. And I just want to, there's a hidden lesson there, right? Like that process never ends, right? We got to revisit, we got to redo it. We got to revisit, we got to redo it. So for those, like, you start with them, but then revise it, right? See what happens. Like, am I a good fit for this relationship, right? Let's reassess and let's evolve. And, internally, we've lived that too. We started with a type of client. Our first ever client 5 years ago was a Mexican restaurant, right? We don't work with restaurants anymore. It has evolved from there, obviously. So super awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. All right. You got the last question? Favorite question?
Favorite question, Jeremy. Where would you be if you didn't publish?
Oh man, that wow. So you mentioned at the start that I wrote something like 250 blog posts in the past year. I started up a daily writing habit and publishing habit at the start of 2020, and then mid in the year I started going for longer multi-day posts, and so kind of got away from that elusive target of the daily publishing. But what I realized through writing a blog post every day was that just like it unlocked all my ideas. So I have like had a course come out of that, actually multiple courses now. I have had product or like service offerings for our clients. I've had like future business ideas, like just everything has come from that publishing, writing and publishing and creating that content for me over the past year. And that single habit has just like transformed everything for me in terms of my like confidence and like feeling like, I think the biggest thing is having written it all down and published that content. It's like, now when somebody asks me a question, I'm like, oh yeah, it's easy for my brain to go, yeah, I have an answer for that because I wrote it down and published it. And so I feel like so much sharper on consulting calls and things like that. I don't have to think through things. I'm like, no, I already know the answer to this because I already thought about that question and created content around it.
That's amazing, guys. Go unlock your ideas. Go publish. And Jeremy, I want to give you here, because I know we're coming up towards the end of this episode, but I want to give you space for you to, share a little bit about the Podcast Marketing Academy. I checked it out. I know it is a cohort style where you get a group of people and you're actively, in there helping them. So I'm curious too, when is the next one going to be open? How people can find it?
Yeah. So I'll have a link with all the information about me, a bunch of like recommended podcasts, books, stuff I'm into, as well as Podcast Marketing Academy and other resources like that. That'll be at counterweightcreative.co/content-is-profit. All one word there. But the next Podcast Marketing Academy is going to be going live end of March, early April, and there is going to be when it is available. And you can go to counterweightcreative.co/marketing and sign up for the waitlist there if that's something that you're interested in, and check out the information on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah,
so good.
I encourage people to go and check it out. If you got any value out of today's conversation with Jeremy, please go check it out. I'm sure you won't be disappointed.
Yeah. Go connect, engage, go have those content conversations, guys. And with that being said, thank you so much for tuning into the Content's Profit podcast. Go ahead and subscribe, smash that subscribe button, and follow us on social media at BIZBROS Co.
That is right. And if you find this episode impactful, which I am sure you did because Jeremy was incredible, please don't forget to share it and leave a 5-star review. Thank you.
Bye, guys.